Welcome to another episode of The Postscript, a weekly podcast and YouTube series from the Living Faith Bible Institute, where each week we meet with a pastor or professor from the Bible Institute and we talk about ministry life, we talk about theology, we talk about God's Word and how it applies to our life, with the goal, with the hope that it would be edifying to you, the listener. And so we're thankful that you're with us. We're in the middle of an interview with Pastor Mark Trotter. And in the last episode, we had a conversation about his ministry experiences and how he got into the ministry, how he learned about a biblical philosophy of discipleship, how God showed him that he can know that he has God's Word in the English tongue and that he could believe in his Bible. And those are all things that we talked about. Now, he left us off with a conversation about weird things in ministry. And we want to ask him about those weird things. And essentially what we're going to be talking about is his ministry experiences that he's learned from throughout the years, failures that he's seen in ministry, struggles that he's been surrounded by that help build his faith and give him a perspective on ministry. And so welcome back. Thank you for joining us.
I'm thrilled to be here again, man.
So let's dig right in. So you mentioned, we talked about your life in ministry from an early age up into the years at the church in New Philadelphia. And you mentioned that there was things that God showed you along the way through some experiences. And so will you share some of those things with us?
Sure, man. Yeah. So again, when I got saved, there was never a thought that I would end up in the ministry. And I can see now that along the way, God was trying to do some things to shape my ministry. Everybody, we're doing the same thing, but, everybody's got their nuance because of their journey. And so I shared in the last episode about my coming to Christ and talking about, the long-haired street urchin guy and the radical conversion that it was. And so when I got saved, man, I was, and this is old school. This was 1972, y'all. Yes, we did have cars and such, but so in 72, the churches had Sunday school, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, visitation, and, all that. And
right.
So, hey, this is my life now, and so I'm there for everything. And oblivious to, it was a large church. They were running 2,500 back in those days.
Wow.
They didn't even call it a mega church then, and so, I'm just fat, dumb, and happy coming in there, every week, and I'm listening, hanging on every word. And so, they got this visitation thing. Okay, so the way that they're telling it is, hey, man, we fulfill the Great Commission. We go out on Thursday night, we have a meal, and then we go out and we tell people about Jesus, and we follow up on people to come to the church. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's what we do. And
which is how they reached you, essentially.
Yes, yeah. Essentially, yes. And so I start coming to visitation. And so I'm sitting with all the youth, every week. And, a lot of us, we didn't have cars and all of that at this point. So we're going with adults, workers in the youth group and all of that stuff. So they would always put me with some adults, that worked in the thing, and, have another teenager there. And we would never go tell people about Jesus. We're driving around, and talking. We'd go to Baskin Robbins and get ice cream, and and it was cool.
You like ice cream,
sure, and I like people, and
sure.
And so we're engaging and all that. I'm thinking this is kind of weird, though, that we build this as we're going to go tell people about Jesus, but we never do, and so. I keep doing that. And one day, the youth pastor, who I highly respected, he came to my house. Okay, now this church where I was saved is at the gateway of the Miami Country Club. And so, I mean, there's some rich folk that go to the church, and I'm on the other side of the tracks, man.
Yeah.
And so for the youth pastor to come to my house, it was like, I've been going to afterglows at houses that I felt like I was in Hollywood, man. And I'm, marveling that people live like.
I see. So one of the common things that keeps coming up in these episodes is afterglows, which the young people have no idea what an afterglow is, by the way.
Okay. Well, it's after church on Sunday night. You do
potluck.
Well, no, it's more youthy. You go over to people's house and you eat potato chips and.
But you eat. Eating is always a part of an afterglow. Okay, yeah.
Yes, it's Baptist, man.
Yeah, right.
And so it's just a chance to hang out again because you're not getting enough of Sunday morning, Sunday school, Sunday morning, right. Wednesday night visitation.
And so you were going to these houses. And it was almost foreign, like a foreign world.
Oh, I'm in awe.
Yeah.
And so when the youth pastor comes to my house, I mean, I'm embarrassed to bring him into my house. I hate that I'm that proud, but it was reality. Had an intern with him, and and I'm like, I wonder what they're doing here, And so I'm a little weirded out by it. And
you're saying they showed up suddenly?
Yes,
okay.
Just out of the blue. And,
right.
I'm so like, yeah, so what's up? Well, Mark, we're here to talk to you about your hair. And I'm like, say what? My what? I mean, I don't have a file to pull on this in my head. Mark, the Bible says that it's a shame for a man to have long hair. And I'm like, my girlfriend at that time had hair down to where her back changed names.
Right, which was kind of common in the 70s, right?
Yeah, sure. And so I thought that was long hair, And so I was like, oh, so is my hair long? And I wasn't being an idiot, I'm like, wow, that's weird. And everybody back in those days had long hair, And long hair. Here I am using their terminology. I didn't get it. I mean, he was, he says, well, if I was in a car behind you and I was looking at you, I wouldn't know if you were a boy or a girl. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm not trying to be an idiot, but when I got out of the car, would you know? I wasn't,
sure.
It was just not making sense. And so, that happened and they left and I was like, well, that was weird. So I keep coming to everything and keep coming to visitation and still drive around. And so one day the assistant pastor comes over, as we're all eating, and he comes behind me and he rubbing my traps. And, hey, Mark, why don't you go out with me tonight? And so all the kids are like, ooh, this is the assistant pastor, And I'm like, hey, cool. And I'm like, doggone, I was hoping to hang out with some of these,
Yeah, you wanted some Baskin Robbins.
Yeah, man. So, he was nice as all get out. I mean, we're driving around. And he's just talking to me and about life. And we had been out probably an hour and 15 minutes. And he says, so did Mr. Lanier, that's the youth pastor, did he talk to you about your hair? And I was like, yeah. And he said, what'd you think about that? And I said, well, it was kind of weird to me. I didn't get it totally. So he pulls the car over and he says, Mark, let me just be honest with you. Your hair is offensive to the people in your church. Mm. And you're probably wondering why, when you go on visitation, you never really get to do what we do. We just feel like you're a bad testimony for Christ with that long hair. And
I feel like I'm in the car right now, and he's talking to me. This is like I'm sweating over here. Where's this going?
And so he takes me to 1 Corinthians 8.
Yeah,
and
of course.
he's showing me, this thing of meat offered to idols. I was learning stuff, but I'm not seeing where he's going, and so, he explains all of this meat offered to idols and how we have liberty and all of that. But Paul got to the point to where he said that if meat makes my brother to offend, I will eat no meat. Mm-hmm. And he says, Mark, you know what? What I would suggest to you is if your hair is being offensive to the people of the church, do what Paul did. Just cut it. Don't be offensive. I said, okay. Really? You'll get it cut? I'm like, yeah, man.
Right.
I'll pick you up tomorrow and I'll pay for it. So he takes me and I get my little Christian haircut. And, dude, I was the poster child. The street urchin got saved and now he even looks like a Christian. And so, man, I'm getting all kinds of props and, all this kind of craziness. And so shortly thereafter, the assistant pastor, makes the announcement one Sunday morning that he's going to be leaving the church. God had opened this opportunity. He left. About 6 months after that, I find out that God really wasn't moving him. He had been having a 2-year affair with one of the choir members, and it got found out. And so they were going to, let him ride off into the sunset. And when I heard that, I couldn't help but think, dude, you had the audacity to talk about my hair being offensive while you are involved with someone that isn't your wife. And wow, I was like, I had to process that. And, but again, it was all the beginning stages of God trying to show me that you can get all the externally stuff looking right, but the real issue is what's on the inside. Dude, what I have been trying to do for about the last 40 years of my life is get back to the long-haired kid that didn't know jack squat, that was getting up 2 hours before school started at 7 to pray that God would use me to reach people at school with my long hair that don't, and oblivious to all of the externally type stuff. And so
wow,
I got into the ministry, and we're going to fast forward about 4.5 years after I got in the ministry. I got to Marietta. They wanted me to go to the largest church in America. The pastor wanted me to go to this soul winning conference up in Hammond, Indiana.
Okay.
And so I get there, and man, thousands of people, it was a huge place. I sit down in a pew, and as I look down in the pew in front of me, here's this assistant pastor guy that had talked to me about my hair. And so, I'm playing this in my mind through the service, just, wow, how whack all of this is. And here he's right there. And so after the service was over, I walked up to him and I said, hey, I don't know if you'll remember me or not. My name is Mark Trotter from Miami. Mark, I do remember you. You were straddling the fence and didn't know if you were going to follow Jesus or not. And man, it's just so good to see that you decided to follow Jesus. And I'm telling you, dude, what I wanted to say is, no, I'm the one that kept his draws on. And I just ate it and just said, yeah. But again, so I'm forced again to process this whole world of Christianity and this external thing. And as long as the external looks good, then we're good.
Right.
And, it was God trying to teach me that you just keep the internal right.
Yeah.
And keep a heart for me. And
It's the whole whited sepulcher thing.
yes, man.
It's powerful. And we're all always learning about that, right? Like we fail to understand that God is most concerned with the inner man.
Amen.
And if the soul and the spirit aren't right, nothing can be right. And that's an amazing thing that I think all of us continue to learn over and over again. I know that you've got another story from the Georgia church that helped you too.
Yeah. So, in when I was in California, it was the big push for the big church thing. And one of the reasons that it made me want to leave is one day we're in a staff meeting. Okay. And so back in these days, we weren't training people to make disciples and reach people with the gospel. A pastor would hire a staff to build the church. So you'd go out and you'd build your class so you could tout the numbers. It's the craziest thing. Yeah. And this was in, the fundamental Baptist world, And so, the church wasn't growing the way that some of his buddies' churches were growing. And so we got in a staff meeting one day. And we had a large staff and, it was a good staff. And the dude says, what I've been thinking about doing is giving you guys a base salary. And then for every person that you bring down the aisle on a Sunday that you've won to Christ in the week, then we'll give you...
No way.
And if they get baptized, if they join the church, then, we'll base your salary this way. And we're all like, are you kidding me? We're going to be, this is going to get commission? Are you kidding? And I'm not saying that we're going to do this. I'm just telling you, I'm thinking about it. But we're going to do something that's going to grow this church. Oh, and so, I'm just tripping, man. And again, it was just God just trying to show me that you can have a big church. Mm. And the inner workings of that thing can be so carnal, so out to lunch that it has totally missed the purposes. The glory of God was never the issue. Mm. And so God was trying to teach me. So, hey, I've got to get out of here. Door opens for me to go to Georgia. And so, back in the 70s, the church that I was going to was one of the Elmer Towns came out with a book, The 10 Fastest Growing Churches in America. And this was one of them. And so I get there and I'm there about 6 months and, a huge church, huge facilities. And the pastor's office was down at the end of the hall. Mine was right next to his before you got there. And every day there was this woman that was coming. And who counsels this much, And she drove, hey, you can drive anything you want. She drove a yellow Corvette, and I hate to stereotype it, but she, kind of looked like a barmaid,
She's like the bombshell type.
Yeah. And it was just weird. And so it was, I found out what was really happening. I mean, he came to me and a guy that was in my ministry, young marrieds at that time, and says, hey, this woman, and he mentions her name.
Because he suspected you knew.
No, he knows nothing
Okay.
at this point. And at this point, I didn't know anything. This is how I found out. So he wants me and this guy to go to her house to find a phone tap, because he says, I've been counseling her, and there's this divorce, this situation that's going on, and her husband knows things that the only way that he can know it is if her line was tapped. And so, since I'm going to be in this divorce suit thing, can you guys go over and just see if you can find a phone tap? And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? Am I being punked? And this is before Punked was out. And I'm like, this is just whack. So I'm a staff member. So I go over to this woman's house. Long story short, I do find the phone tap. And she, I said, hey, I think this is what you're looking for. She grabs it out of my hand. Oh, you have saved my kids. Oh, and I'm like, what? And it was just whack. So I ended up finding out all about that. I don't know what to do, with what I know. And so, my wife is saying, man, let's just get out of here. Let people know that you're looking. And I'm like, babe, that's how we ended up here. Let's just let God do this thing. And so God wasn't doing anything. And so my gurus at that time were John MacArthur and Chuck Swindoll. And so I wrote a letter. Chuck Swindoll responded within 2 weeks, 2-page letter. He says, if what you said is true, it's the wildest story that I've ever heard. I've left out details. Yeah. I'm talking mafia connections and all this with the pastor. And, so he says, you have a biblical responsibility to confront him. And yet, if your reason for confronting him is because you're mad or because you want to see him pay, then you're not the dude. And, you got to have a heart to see him restored, not necessarily to ministry, but to Christ. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I was mad, it ticked me off. And so I began to pray that God would change my heart on it. And he did in about a 3-week period of time. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm feeling like, how in the world is this little 26-year-old dude gonna, in the 10 fastest growing churches in America, gonna go confront him? And so I told my wife, okay, baby, this is the day. I might be home in an hour and we might be looking for a job. But we were praying that I would be a Nathan, and that maybe it would be that. So I poked my head into his office that day and I said, hey, Pastor, if you have some time this morning, I'd love to talk with you. Oh man, Mark, my schedule today is just so crazy. Could we do it tomorrow? And I'm like, sure. I go back to my office and okay, yeah, I can breathe. About 15 minutes later, I think he's working in, well, what's he wanting to talk about? And he already knows about the phone tap and, all this kind of thing. So he buzzes my office and says, hey, Mark, I found some time. Why don't you come on over? So I'm trying to get up the guts to go do this, So I come in and he's all buddy. Hey, buddy, come on in. Have a seat. What's on your mind, And I'm like, Pastor, I don't know any way to do this other than just say, I know what's going on with you. And I mentioned her name. And this is what he does. And if you're listening on audio, he's folding his arms and he's staring me down and piercing me through, not saying a word. And I had just read the week before. I think everybody knows this now, that when you're in some kind of a situation like that, and nobody's talking, the first one that talks loses. And so I'm just looking back at him. And so it was whack, man. So he finally says, so what are you going to do? And I said, well, I didn't know I was going to have that option, actually. And, so he starts talking about, man, if I did what you think I did, would it make me any different than David? And I'm like, boy, Pastor, you know better than I do what happened to David as a result of all of that. And, he says, Mark, I would just encourage you to believe the best about people, and I'm like, Pastor, I think I do that. And he goes, well, so what are you going to do? And I said, well, there's this guy in New Philadelphia that has called me a couple of times. I don't know if that's going to end up, but, I'm probably going to be leaving. Okay, well, let me know. And I'm like, I walk out of there. I'm like, what the heck just happened, And so I went through my day, of course I told Sherry, and I went through my day. I had been out of the office and I came back in. Everybody else was gone. It's just him. He buzzes my office and he says, hey, Mark, come on in for a minute. And I'm like, So I walk in. He said, I've been thinking about what you said. And, if it's more money that you need, right now things are a little tight, but we can make it up to you.
Jeez.
And I said, Pastor, did you think I was blackmailing you? And, oh, no, buddy. I'm just saying if money's going to help this, then we can work that out. And once again, the Lord was just trying to show me, dude, the inside is a whole lot more important than the outside. And, at this time, he's preaching about the very things that he's doing. So, long story short, I leave. I was great friends with his son, who was also on the staff. Idolized his dad. I couldn't tell him. About 10 years later, I'm in New Philadelphia. Life is so awesome. I mean, we were on all cylinders at that point. He calls me up, his son, out of the blue. And he says, hey, I'd love to come see you. And I'm like, dude, I would love that. And so, he says, I can't be there this Sunday, but I'll be there the next, And so he says, but what's weird is by the time that I get there, my mom and dad will probably be divorced. And I'm like, oh, really? What's up? We'll talk about it when we get there. And so by the time he came up, the reason he wanted to come up is just to find out, because he put all of it together when he started finding out what was happening. And so by the time that he came to me, he says, we know of 34 affairs that he's had with people in the church. And he said, I had high hopes that maybe you had confronted him with what you knew. And so I told him, what had happened. And so, a lot of long, sad stories. But in the midst of it all, God used all of that to just constantly be reminding me to make sure that the inside, your heart for God, is what is driving everything that you do, because you can get all of the outside and all the outer workings to where it looks spiritual and it's empty.
Wow. Well, Mark, you've left us with a serious warning. I mean, in many regards.
I hope.
Yeah. So first of all, you're a great storyteller. So it's like, I'm just listening. It's really interesting. But at the same time, it is heavy. And it reminds us to be on watch for our heart and our mind, brother. And to protect our heart and mind, and to make sure that the light of God's word is guiding our path. And so thank you for your weird stories because they've provided some insight. And in the next episode, we're going to be talking about your book. So it'll be a little bit lighter.
Yes.
I hope.
Maybe not as depressing.
Right. But thank you very much. And so thank you for joining us as well in another episode of The Postscript. We thank Pastor Mark Trotter and his storytelling is very good. If any of this resonated with you, I mean, if you recognize that you're a leader that's struggling and there's something wrong with your inner man, you're maybe in a dry season or in a season of temptation, and you know that there's repenting you need to do, this is an opportunity. This is a call for you to go to your leaders and make confession. And so please take the warning of the stories today really serious. The inner man is of great significance. Bodily exercise profiteth little. And what ultimately is important to God is whether or not your soul is right.
Amen.
So thank you again for joining us. If you're interested in Living Faith Bible Institute, please visit lfbi.org. You can visit our YouTube channel and hear all of our previous episodes. Go check that out. Visit the podcast at thepostscriptshow.com. Or if you're interested in Living Faith Fellowship, visit lffellowship.com. Thanks again. Bye.
I'm the high school pastor at Midtown Baptist Temple, and I'm a student of Living Faith Bible Institute, where I can go to class and know that I'm going to walk away with something that I can use, if not this week, in the future. Sometimes, especially at school, you might be in a class that's going to get you a degree, but it has no application in your life. Well, in LFBI, I know that I'm going to take these classes and it's either going to apply directly to my craft, to my weekly procedures, or it's going to be something in the Word that I'm going to have a student or a counselor who has that question. And now I'm a little more equipped to do the work in the ministry. So I love giving my life every moment I can to young people and to the team I work with, because we are affecting the world. Enroll for classes at lfbi.org. If you are interested in donating to LFBI to support future pastors and leaders, please visit lfbi.org/donate.